This galaxy runs on fear, and I'm about to own the supply.
The room went dark before the lights failed. That was the thing nobody could explain afterward. The sequence was wrong. In a normal power failure, the lights died first, and then the darkness followed, the absence filling the space that illumination had occupied. In the private negotiation suite on the 47th floor of the vertical city's most expensive tower, the darkness arrived before anything stopped working. The lights were still on. The holographic display still cycled through Pike Syndicate trade route projections. The drinks on the tables still held their condensation rings on the imported wood surface. And the room was dark. Black Sun Executive Director Romus Vel noticed it first because he noticed everything first. That was why he was still alive at 53 in a profession where most people didn't make 40. The darkness wasn't visual. It was something behind the visual, a quality of the air itself, as if the space between objects had decided to become something other than space. He'd felt something like it once before, during a Force user interrogation gone wrong on Corellia, the moment before a Jedi reached into a man's mind and pulled out everything it wanted. This was different. That had felt like being seen. This felt like being eaten. Director Vel. The voice arrived without sound being involved in the process. Not whispered, not spoken, not transmitted. Present. The way a memory was present. The way a debt was present. We need to talk about your supply chain. Vel's 3 bodyguards, Mandalorian trained, expensively equipped, professionally competent, reached for their weapons simultaneously. None of them completed the reach. Not because anything stopped their hands, because their hands were still moving when something inside them decided that the hands weren't the relevant part of the situation, and the relevant part was something older and further in. Vel watched his bodyguard stop. Not fall, not collapse. Stop, mid-motion, mid-breath, mid-thought. The specific cessation of things that had been running continuously and simply weren't anymore. They remained standing. Their eyes remained open. Something behind the eyes had left, quietly, without announcement, like a tenant who packs in the night and is gone before the landlord checks. The darkness in the room moved. It moved the way shadows moved when a light source changed position. But there was no light source changing position, and what stepped out of it was a man. Young enough to be wrong for the room. Mid-20s, dark-haired, wearing clothes that had no business being in this part of the galaxy, and carrying himself with the specific ease of someone who had already calculated every variable in the environment and found none of them concerning. His eyes were wrong. Not the yellow of Sith corruption or the silver of certain Force traditions. Wrong in a way that had no category, like looking at something that was looking back from a distance much greater than the room allowed. Jackie Estacado, he said, which was apparently an introduction. New management. Vel had survived 53 years by being very good at the specific skill of assessing threats quickly and responding proportionally. And he assessed this one in 4 seconds and arrived at the conclusion that proportional response was not a category the situation offered. New management of what? He said. His voice was steady. He was proud of that. This. Jackie gestured. A small, economical movement that somehow encompassed the tower, the vertical city below it, the moon of Nar Shaddaa beyond the windows, and by implication, everything that Nar Shaddaa represented in the galaxy's criminal ecosystem. The whole operation, the supply chains, the territorial agreements, the protection arrangements, the political relationships with the Hutts. He sat down in the chair across from Vel, with the unhurried confidence of someone taking a seat they'd already decided was theirs. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to inform. Black Sun doesn't respond to... Black Sun, Jackie said, is going to have a significant restructuring event in the next 72 hours. The question is whether you're positioned on the side of that event that continues to exist. He looked at Vel with the eyes that were wrong. I'm giving you the opportunity to make that decision consciously rather than have it made for you. Vel looked at his bodyguards, at the empty quality behind their open eyes. at the darkness that was still present in the room in a way he couldn't locate but couldn't stop feeling. "What are you?" he said. Jackie considered the question with what appeared to be genuine thoughtfulness. "Something older than your force," he said. "Something that was here before the light and the dark decided to have a philosophical disagreement about the nature of reality." He paused. "Something that finds your galaxy's power structures very organized and very fragile and very interesting." The darkness moved again. It moved toward Vel with the patient, purposeful movement of something that understood time differently than the people inside it did. He had 3 seconds to understand what was happening, and he used them well. He understood it completely, which was more than most people got. Director Romus Vel ceased to exist in a way that left his body present but empty, like a building after the occupants have moved and the furniture has been removed and only the architecture remains. Jackie stood, looked at the 3 bodyguards, who were still standing with their hands in their reaching positions. "You can go," he said. "Tell whoever sent you what you saw. Use whatever words you want. The important thing is that they understand the part where he's gone." He looked at the holographic display still cycling through Pike Syndicate trade route projections, at the drinks with their condensation rings, at the city below the windows, the smuggler's moon, the galaxy's most concentrated point of criminal infrastructure, layered and interconnected and running on the specific fuel of fear and profit in roughly equal measure. The darkness whispered at the edges of his awareness, the way it always whispered. Not words exactly, more like the sensation of words, the impression of meaning without the medium of language. It was pleased. It was always pleased when it fed. Aunt Jackie had spent enough years with it to know that its pleasure and his interests aligned approximately 60% of the time, which was both the most dangerous thing about it and the only reason he was still functional. He walked to the window. The vertical city spread below him, levels and layers and the particular organized chaos of a place that existed entirely outside the galaxy's official power structures. 47 floors up, looking at the infrastructure of everything the Empire pretended didn't run the galaxy, he thought about what he'd learned in the 6 days since he'd arrived. The Underworld was organized. That had surprised him. Not organized the way a corporation was organized or the way a military was organized, but organized the way a reef was organized, everything in a specific relationship with everything else. Occupying its ecological niche, the whole structure maintained by the constant pressure of every part against every other part. The Hutts held the foundation. Black Sun handled the mid-tier operations. The Pikes controlled the spice trade. The Bounty Hunters Guild provided enforcement that crossed territorial lines. Crimson Dawn's remnants operated in the margins, ambitious and destabilized. It was exactly like New York, which meant he knew exactly how to take it apart. The Hutt response came 36 hours later, because Hutts were deliberate and deliberate things took 36 hours to mobilize when someone had done something unprecedented to one of their key business relationships. 8 bounty hunters. Varied species, varied equipment, and unified by the specific professional focus of people who had been offered a significant sum of money to solve a problem that their clients couldn't solve through normal channels. They found Jackie on level 1313, the deepest accessible level of Coruscant's Underworld, which he'd moved to after Nar Shaddaa, because level 1313 was the kind of place where things happened that the upper city didn't need to know about. And he'd needed somewhere to think. The hunters were good. He could tell that immediately. The way they distributed themselves through the level's geography, using the infrastructure to create overlapping fields of fire that gave him no obvious direction of retreat. Someone had briefed them carefully on the importance of not leaving angles uncovered. They hadn't been briefed on the darkness.
Jabba sends his regards. He wants to know what you are.
Then he should come ask himself.
Jabba doesn't come to things.
That's going to change.
The Trandoshan fired. The disruptor bolt hit Jackie's center mass and did what disruptor bolts did. Partial molecular disruption, the kind of wound that ended biological processes in ways that were difficult to recover from. He went down. The hunters moved with the professional efficiency of people finishing a job, closing distance, confirming the target. The darkness closed with them, not around them, through them, the specific penetrating quality of something that didn't interact with physical space the way physical things did. The hunters encountered it at the level where consciousness lived rather than the level where bodies lived, and consciousness, it turned out, was considerably less defended than a Mandalorian-trained body. Jackie stood up. The wound was already different than it had been. Not healed exactly, more like the relevant processes had been reminded that they were supposed to be running and had resumed. The darkness fixed things when it wanted to. When it didn't want to, it let them stay broken, which was its version of motivation. 6 of the 8 hunters were on the floor, not dead. The darkness was being conservative tonight, which meant it was thinking about something. The other 2 had run, which was the correct tactical response to the situation and would have worked if the darkness weren't faster than running. They came back. They sat down. They looked at Jackie with the expression of people who had just experienced something that their professional training had not prepared them for. "You're going to go back to whoever hired you," Jackie said, "and you're going to describe exactly what happened here. Not your version of it, exactly what happened. The part where 8 of you came down here, and 8 of you are going back, and none of the 8 of you completed the job." He looked at them. "And you're going to tell them that the next time they want to communicate with me, they can send a representative. A single representative. Someone who can have a conversation." He paused. "Jabba can have that conversation. Or Jabba can keep sending hunters, and I'll keep sending them back, and eventually the math of that arrangement is going to become very clear." The 2 hunters left. The 6 on the floor gradually remembered how to stand and followed. Jackie sat in the dark of level 1313 and let the darkness settle. The post-feeding quiet of it, the specific satiation that made it temporarily less insistent. In those windows of quiet, he could think clearly, which was when he did his best operational planning. The Underworld's reaction to him so far had been predictable. Fear followed by force, followed by confusion when force didn't produce expected results. What came after confusion was the interesting part. The moment when an organization that had been running on established patterns encountered something that didn't fit the patterns and had to decide whether to update its model or collapse. The Hutts would update. They were too old and too politically sophisticated to collapse over one unprecedented variable. Black Sun would fragment. There were already fault lines in their hierarchy that a well-placed pressure point would crack open. Crimson Dawn's remnants would do something unpredictable, which he'd have to watch carefully. The darkness whispered something about the shape of the Empire above all of this. The official galaxy pressing down on the criminal one. The relationship between them more symbiotic than either side admitted. Jackie looked up at the ceiling of level 1313, which was also the floor of level 1312, which was also the underside of a city that stretched upward for kilometers until it reached the surface where the Empire's architecture expressed its philosophy in steel and stone. He thought about what the darkness had said when it first showed him this galaxy. Not the words. The darkness didn't really do words, but the impression. The sense of something vast and old and organized around a power source that the darkness recognized the way a predator recognized prey. The Force. He'd felt it since he'd arrived, not as something he could use, more as a texture in the environment, a background radiation of organized energy that everything in this galaxy related to in one way or another. Force users were the most obvious expression of it, but it was everywhere, in the way factions organized themselves, in the mythology that crime syndicates used to justify their territorial claims, in the specific fear that governed the relationship between the Underworld and the Empire. Everything in this galaxy was downstream of the Force. Everything except him. He stood, rolled his shoulder where the disruptor bolt had hit and found it acceptably functional, looked at the level 1313 infrastructure around him with a specific assessment of someone choosing a base of operations. Good sight lines, multiple exit routes, far enough below the official city that Imperial sensors had significant coverage gaps. Close enough to the transit networks that movement was fast when movement needed to be fast. "This works," he said, to the darkness and to himself and to the darkness. which were 3 different addressees that occasionally overlapped. The darkness agreed. Somewhere above him, in the towers of Nar Shaddaa and the throne rooms of Hutt space and the Black Sun command centers scattered across the mid-rim, the message from level 1313 was arriving. Not a transmission, not a formal communication. The message that traveled through criminal networks without using criminal networks. The specific, unstoppable information transfer of fear spreading through interconnected systems until everyone who needed to know something knew it. Something new was in the galaxy. It wasn't Sith. It wasn't Jedi. It wasn't anything the Underworld's extensive institutional memory had a category for. And the 8 hunters Jabba had sent to solve the problem were coming back, all of them, none of them having solved anything, with expressions that their colleagues would spend weeks trying to interpret. The Hutts began to understand that money was not going to be the relevant currency in whatever was coming. If you want to see more crossover stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see take over the Star Wars Underworld in the comments below. This is only the beginning. Black Sun had 7 prince-level executives operating in the Imperial era. By the time Jackie finished his 3rd week in the galaxy, 4 of them had made decisions they wouldn't have made 3 weeks ago. Decisions that defied the organizational logic Black Sun had been running on for decades. Decisions that served no obvious strategic interest. Decisions that, viewed individually, looked like inexplicable lapses in judgment and, viewed collectively, looked like a pattern. The pattern looked like someone rearranging furniture in a house while the occupants were asleep. Prince Xizor would have noticed it faster than anyone. But Xizor wasn't operational yet. This was the Imperial era's earlier period, when Black Sun's leadership was distributed and competitive rather than consolidated under a single dominant figure, which meant the organization's intelligence capacity was excellent at monitoring external threats and structurally blind to internal ones. Every prince was watching the other princes. Nobody was watching the space between them. Jackie had walked through that space like it was a corridor built for him. The first prince, a feline named Darrow, whose emotional manipulation abilities made him extraordinarily effective at criminal politics, had been the most straightforward. The darkness operated below the level where feline pheromone chemistry worked, in the part of consciousness that pheromones didn't reach. And once Jackie was inside that part, there was very little Darrow's specific advantages could do about it. The conversation had lasted 40 minutes. Darrow had agreed to redirect 3 major supply chains, and compromised 2 Imperial Intelligence contacts he'd been cultivating for years, and introduced Jackie to the Black Sun's internal communication network under the cover story that he was a new financial consultant from the corporate sector. Darrow didn't remember agreeing to any of this. He remembered a 40-minute conversation about quarterly projections that had gone perfectly normally. The 2nd and 3rd princes had been more complicated, not because they were more capable, but because the darkness had been hungry after Darrow, and hungry darkness was less precise. Jackie had spent an additional week letting it settle before approaching them, because imprecision in criminal political environments had cascading consequences that were difficult to manage after the fact. The 4th prince had come to him. That had been unexpected. A Zabrak named Senna, who ran Black Sun's Eastern Mid-Rim operations, arrived at level 1313 without an appointment, without a weapons escort, without any of the infrastructure that Black Sun executives used to conduct meetings that mattered. He sat down across from Jackie in the space that had become, through the specific accumulation of presence over 3 weeks, something between a throne room and an office, and said, "I know what you're doing." Jackie looked at him. "What am I doing?" "Eating Black Sun from the inside," Senny said. "Darrow doesn't know it. The others don't know it. But I've been watching Darrow for 6 years, and there are 17 decisions he's made in the past 3 weeks that he would not have made with his normal judgment operating." He paused. "Which means his normal judgment isn't operating. And you came here instead of reporting this to the other princes," Jackie said. "I came here instead of reporting it because I want to understand what I'm dealing with before I decide what to do with the information." Senna's expression was the studied calm of someone who was genuinely afraid and had decided that the fear was less useful than the information it was accompanying. "What are you?" Jackie looked at him for a moment. The darkness stirred. the specific stirring that meant it was interested rather than hungry, which was a better sign. "Something that was going to get to you eventually," Jackie said. "You just got here first." He paused. "That's either very smart or very stupid, depending on what you do next." "What are my options?" "You can report what you know to the other princes. Black Sun mobilizes against me. I deal with that, which is going to be messier than what I've been doing, and afterward, Black Sun has fewer princes." Jackie looked at him steadily. "Or you can tell me what you want, and we can have a different conversation." Senna was quiet for a moment. "I want to survive the next 6 months," he said. "In my professional experience, the best way to survive the next 6 months is to be on the side of whatever is going to win the next 6 months. That's very practical. I'm a very practical person." Jackie appreciated practical people. The darkness appreciated them in a different way, the way a current appreciated a boat that aligned with its direction rather than fighting it. Both appreciations were genuine. Neither was entirely safe for the object of them. "Then here's what I want from you," Jackie said. "The Black Sun's complete internal communication architecture. Every channel, every encryption key, every back-channel relationship between the princes and their Imperial Intelligence contacts." He paused. "And I want the location of the organizational consensus meetings, the ones the princes think are secure." Senna looked at him. "You want to take over Black Sun?" "I want Black Sun to continue operating," Jackie said, "under different management." He held Sen's gaze. "There's a difference between taking something over and destroying it. I'm not here to destroy functional infrastructure. I'm here to redirect it." "Toward what?" Jackie looked at the ceiling. At the kilometers of city above him and the galaxy above that, and the force-organized power structures that ran through everything like a nervous system. "Toward something that makes sense," he said. "This galaxy runs on the Force. Every faction, every empire, every crime syndicate. They all exist in relationship to Force-sensitive power. The Emperor has it. The Jedi had it. The Sith philosophy is built around it." He paused. "I'm not in that relationship, which means I can build something that operates completely outside those power structures. A criminal empire that the Force can't see," Senny said slowly. "A criminal empire that the Force can't predict," Jackie corrected. "There's a difference. The Force sees plenty of things, but prophecy, precognition, the Sith's ability to read the currents of galactic events, all of that operates within the Force's framework. Something that exists outside the framework doesn't show up in the calculations." He looked at Senna. "Palpatine can see every move the rebellion makes before they make it. He can't see me." Senna was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "What do I get?" "You get to be the person who understood this before everyone else," Jackie said, "which is the most valuable position in any transition. The people who understand early shape what comes after. The people who understand late just survive it." The Shadow Cartel was formally organized over the following 2 weeks. Not as a public declaration, not as an announcement that traveled through the Underworld's information networks, but as a structural reality that came into existence through the accumulation of redirected relationships, compromised loyalties, and the specific gravitational pull of something that criminal networks could feel without being able to locate. It had no name that Jackie gave it. The name Shadow Cartel came from the Underworld itself, the term that started appearing in encrypted communications between Hutt kajidics and Black Sun's remaining independent princes as they tried to describe the thing that was reorganizing the galaxy's criminal infrastructure around a center they couldn't identify. The darkness avatars came next. Jackie had been conservative with them in the first weeks. The constructs that the darkness could generate from itself. Extensions of its entity that operated independently across distances that would have required physical travel otherwise. Each one cost something. Not energy exactly, more like attention. A fraction of the darkness's focus divided from the whole and directed toward a specific purpose. He could sustain approximately a dozen simultaneously before the division became thin enough that the avatars started making decisions that diverged from his intentions. He deployed 7. 1 to each of the 3 Black Sun princes whose cooperation had been established through Senna's intelligence. One to the primary Pike Syndicate distribution hub on Kessel, where the spice trade intersected with Imperial shipping lanes in ways that created natural leverage points. One to a Hutt kajidic meeting on Nar Shaddaa that he'd learned about through Darrow's redirected intelligence contacts. One to a Crimson Dawn cell operating out of the Outer Rim, where Maul's former lieutenants were trying to rebuild something from the ruins of what he'd left. And one to a location he kept private from Senna and from Darrow, and from everyone except the darkness itself. A location that mattered for reasons that weren't operational yet. The avatars looked like him, moved like him, spoke like him in a way that was accurate enough to pass in environments where nobody had met him in person, which was most environments. They extended his reach to 7 systems simultaneously and allowed the Shadow Cartel's early architecture to take shape faster than a single physical presence could have managed. Imperial Intelligence noticed on the 19th day. Not the avatars. The avatars were invisible to Imperial sensors in the same way Jackie was invisible to Force perception, operating in a register that the Empire's surveillance infrastructure hadn't been built to detect because the Empire's surveillance infrastructure had been built around detecting Force users and conventional criminal activity. And the thing the avatars were made of was neither. What Imperial Intelligence noticed was the effect, the specific pattern of criminal collapse and reorganization that left no conventional explanation. 3 Black Sun distribution networks had restructured their routing in ways that removed Imperial cut points. 2 Hutt kajidics had quietly settled territorial disputes that had been running for decades. The settlement terms making no political sense for either party, but both of them apparently satisfied with the outcome. The Pike Syndicate's Kessel operation had reorganized its labor contractor relationships, eliminating several Imperial-connected middlemen who had been providing intelligence with supply chain access for years. The analyst who first flagged the pattern was a junior intelligence officer named Korith, operating out of a regional office on Korolog. She filed her report with the specific careful language of someone who understood that the report was going to sound strange and wanted to preemptively defend the quality of her methodology. The report traveled up 3 levels of the intelligence hierarchy before someone with sufficient clearance and pattern recognition experience read it and sent it further up with a notation attached. The notation said, "This is not a new crime lord. This is not a rebel intelligence operation. This is not a Force user. I don't know what this is. Flag for senior analysis." Senior analysis produced a document that traveled to Director Krennic's office, then to Tarkin's, then, because both of them had learned to be careful about things they couldn't explain, to the desk of Lord Vader's intelligence coordinator with a cover classification that hadn't been used in 11 years. Non-Force anomaly. Extreme threat level. Unknown. Vader received the file on the 23rd day. He read it once, set it down, reached into the Force with the specific searching quality of someone looking for a disturbance they'd already felt at the edge of perception but hadn't been able to locate. The Force showed him the Underworld surface, the criminal networks, the territorial disputes, the Imperial cut points, and their disruption. It showed him what was absent, the usual Force signatures that accompanied criminal organization at this scale. Crime lords had presence in the Force, the dark weight of ambition and violence. Even the most Force-blind criminal generated ripples. The thing reorganizing the galactic underworld generated nothing, which was itself a kind of signal. The Force showed him an absence shaped like a presence, the negative space of something operating in the galaxy that the Force could outline but not illuminate. He sent a probe team, not Inquisitors, not yet. A covert observation unit, 4 operatives experienced in deep underworld penetration, equipped with Imperial Intelligence most sophisticated surveillance equipment, and instructed to observe without engaging. They reached level 1313 on the 26th day. Jackie let them observe for 6 hours before the darkness noticed them, which was approximately 6 hours longer than they deserved. When it noticed them, it told him about them in the way it communicated. The impression of their presence rather than their location. The sense of watchedness resolved into directional awareness. He went to where they were. They were good. He could see that immediately. Positioned well, equipment passive rather than active, doing nothing that would have triggered a standard criminal operations counter-surveillance. They'd found a sight line into his primary space on 1313 through a maintenance junction that required detailed architectural knowledge to identify. He sat down next to the closest operative in the maintenance junction. The operative did not hear him arrive, did not sense him arrive, became aware of him through the specific mechanism of the darkness already being present and Jackie becoming visible within it, which was not a process that normal sensory apparatus processed normally. "Send a message to whoever sent you," Jackie said. He wasn't touching the operative, wasn't threatening the operative in any conventional sense. The darkness was doing something in the space between them that the operative could feel but couldn't identify, which was producing the specific quality of controlled panic that Jackie had learned to read as productive fear rather than counterproductive terror. "Tell them you found what they were looking for. Tell them it found you first. Tell them if they want information, they can ask directly." He paused. "I prefer direct." The operative transmitted the message. The reply from Vader's intelligence coordinator took 4 minutes. It said, "Lord Vader requests a meeting." Jackie looked at the message for a moment. At the darkness around him and the galaxy above him and the criminal empire he'd spent 26 days building in the spaces that the Empire's attention moved past, because it was too busy looking at the Force to look at what wasn't in it. He sent back 3 words. Not yet. Soon. And somewhere in the Imperial hierarchy, and in the specific uncomfortable space between a Lord's request and a refusal, something shifted. Not the political shift of a rival power challenging authority. Something stranger. The shift of an authority structure encountering something it didn't have a protocol for and recognizing for the first time that the absence of a protocol was itself significant information. In his tower on Coruscant, receiving the intelligence coordinator's relay of the 3-word response, Darth Vader stood at his viewport and looked at the city below and felt the Force showing him the Underworld's architecture and the absence at its center, and understood that the absence was not empty. It was full of something that the Force didn't have a name for. He found that significantly more interesting than the Rebel Alliance, and considerably more concerning. The Inquisitor arrived on the 31st day, not at level 1313. Jackie had moved 3 times since the probe team's visit, because the probe team had demonstrated that Imperial Intelligence could find level 1313, and level 1313's primary value had been its obscurity. He was operating out of a decommissioned processing facility in the Outer Rim now, on a planet called Florum, that had the specific advantage of being known primarily as a pirate staging ground, which meant Imperial attention moved through it quickly and didn't linger. The Inquisitor found him anyway. Jackie had been in a meeting with Senna and 2 of the Shadow Cartel's newly established regional coordinators, former Black Sun mid-tier operators who had made the transition with the specific pragmatism of people who understood that organizational loyalty was a resource with a market value, and the market had shifted. The meeting was about supply chain consolidation across the Outer Rim's spice routes, which was the kind of meeting that required attention to logistics detail and left very little bandwidth for monitoring the facility's perimeter. The darkness monitored it instead. It felt the Inquisitor the way Jackie imagined a deep ocean predator felt pressure changes, not through any specific sense, but through the whole organism registering a disturbance in the medium it existed in. The Force had a texture when it was being actively used, and Inquisitors used it with the specific aggressive quality of people trained to use it as a weapon rather than a tool. The pressure change arrived approximately 40 seconds before the Inquisitor did. "We need to stop," Jackie said. Senna looked at him. "We're not finished with the... We need to stop, and you need to leave through the eastern exit and not stop moving until you're off this planet." Jackie stood. "Take the coordinators." "What's happening?" "Imperial Force user, 60 seconds. He looked at them. "Go." They went. The darkness helped, not by doing anything to them, but by creating the specific motivational clarity that came from making the environment feel strongly like a place that should be left immediately. Senna didn't need the additional motivation, but he didn't resist it either. Jackie stood alone in the processing facility and waited. The Inquisitor came through the ceiling. Not dramatically, efficiently, the entrance of someone who had decided that conventional entry points created tactical disadvantages and had planned accordingly. She was Miriellen, young enough that her tattoos were still in the early geometric patterns of someone who hadn't finished the traditional progression, carrying a double-bladed lightsaber with the comfort of someone who had been using it long enough that it was an extension of decision-making rather than an extension of the arm. She landed and ignited both blades simultaneously and looked at Jackie with the Force-enhanced perception that Inquisitors used to read targets before engaging. The rapid assessment of threat level, Force sensitivity, combat capability, emotional state. Her expression shifted. Not much. Inquisitors were trained to control expression because expression was information and information was tactical. But the shift was there. The fractional adjustment of someone whose assessment tool had returned an error rather than a result. She'd reached out with the Force to read him, and the Force had given her nothing, and nothing was not a result that Inquisitor training prepared you for because everything in the galaxy had some relationship to the Force. "You're not Force sensitive," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an attempt to resolve the error by stating what the error couldn't be. "No," Jackie agreed. "Then what are you?" "Complicated," Jackie said. "You should call this off. Go back to Vader and tell him direct contact isn't productive yet. I said soon. I meant soon. Lord Vader doesn't negotiate timelines with targets," she said. Her body was already shifting into combat stance. The specific weight distribution of Inquisitor training, designed for aggressive engagement rather than defensive positioning. "You're coming with me?" "I'm not," Jackie said. She moved. Inquisitor combat was fast in the way that Force-enhanced movement was fast. Not just the body moving quickly, but the decision-to-action interval compressed by precognition, the fighter arriving at positions before conventional reaction time could answer the arrival. She covered the distance between them in the fraction of a second, and the first blade came in at an angle that left no conventional defensive response. Jackie took it. Not blocked, took it. The blade connected with his left arm at the bicep and did what lightsabers did to biological material, which was significant and immediate and painful in the way that things which were burning through tissue were painful. He went back with the impact, not absorbing it, but redirecting it, using the force of the strike to create distance rather than resisting it directly. The darkness responded to the pain. Not with the controlled, purposeful response he directed when he was thinking clearly, with the immediate, instinctive response of something very old being wounded. The reaction that preceded thought the way a hand pulled back from fire before the brain finished processing heat. The processing facility's lights died. Not failed, died. The specific extinction of illumination that happened when something decided the photons in a space should stop behaving like photons. The Inquisitor stopped. She stopped because the Force had just told her something that her training hadn't prepared her for. The Force had felt the darkness respond, and the darkness wasn't in the Force, and something that wasn't in the Force had just expressed enough power to affect the physical environment at a scale that her perceptions registered as significant. The Force was confused. Inquisitor training operated through the Force. Inquisitor training was therefore confused. "What?" she said, and didn't finish the sentence because the sentence didn't have a completion that her vocabulary contained. Jackie held his arm. The wound was already doing the thing wounds did when the darkness was paying attention to them. Not healing exactly, more like the relevant processes being reminded of their operational parameters and resuming them with emphasis. It hurt. The darkness didn't eliminate pain because pain was information and information was useful. "I told you this wasn't productive," he said. His voice was level through the pain because level voices in pain were a skill he'd had to develop professionally and had developed thoroughly. The darkness in the room moved, not toward the Inquisitor, around her, filling the space between them with the specific quality that the darkness produced when it was present without being directed. She could feel it. He could see her feeling it. The Inquisitor's Force perception reaching out and finding something that the Force couldn't identify. the perceptual equivalent of a hand reaching into a familiar space and finding the geometry, had changed. "You're going to report this accurately," Jackie said. "Not the version that makes tactical sense. The accurate version. Force perception unable to read target. Force-based combat ineffective. Physical engagement produced injury to target but did not incapacitate." He looked at her through the darkness. "Vader needs accurate information. You're going to give it to him." "Why would I?" "Because you're smart enough to understand that whoever wins whatever's coming, the people who provided accurate intelligence during the uncertainty, are more valuable than the people who shaped the intelligence to fit the expected outcome." He paused. "And because the darkness is currently deciding whether you're a threat that needs to be addressed or an inconvenience that should be sent home, and accurate reporting tips that calculation toward inconvenience." The Inquisitor was very still for 3 seconds. Then she deactivated one blade, left the other active, not pointed at him, held in a position that was combat-ready without being committed. The specific body language of someone making a tactical decision in real time. She looked at his arm, at the wound that was doing something wounds didn't do, at the darkness in the room that wasn't visual darkness but was more present than any visual darkness she'd experienced. "What is that?" she said, quieter than before. The professional register replaced partially by something more genuine. "Something older than the Force," Jackie said. "Something the Force doesn't have vocabulary for." He held her gaze. "Something that was here before the light side and the dark side decided they were opposites." She processed that for 2 seconds. "Vader is going to want to meet you." "I know," Jackie said. "Tell him I'll come to him. On my timeline. Through a channel that doesn't involve Inquisitors and ceilings." He paused. "Tell him I'm not an enemy of the Empire. I'm a structural reality he needs to understand before he decides what to do about me." She left the way she'd come. Efficiently, without ceremony, with the focused movement of someone who had significant information to deliver and understood that the delivery was more important than the exit. Jackie sat down on a processing unit casing and held his arm and let the darkness continue its work on the wound and thought about what the engagement had confirmed. Lightsabers worked. That was important data. The physical damage was real and significant, and the darkness could address it, but not instantly and not without cost. A sustained engagement with multiple Inquisitors or with Vader himself would produce damage faster than recovery could manage. He wasn't invincible. The darkness wasn't invincible. What they were was different, and different was its own kind of advantage. But different wasn't infinite. He needed the political position solid before the military confrontation became unavoidable. Vader felt it from the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. Not the engagement itself. Florum was too far and the darkness too outside the Force's perceptual range for direct sensing at that distance. What he felt was the Inquisitor's response to the engagement, transmitted through her Force presence as she traveled back toward the capital. The specific quality of a trained operative who had encountered something that had revised their model of the galaxy in ways they were still processing. He called her to his chamber before she'd filed her report. She stood across from him in the red-lit space and delivered the assessment with the flat precision that he'd trained into her, and he listened without interrupting, which was how he listened to things that mattered. "Force perception returned null result," she said. "Not suppressed null. Categorical null, as if the target doesn't exist in Force space at all. Physical engagement confirmed biological vulnerability. The target sustained significant injury from lightsaber contact." She paused. "The injury was undergoing anomalous recovery at the point of my departure. Not Force healing. Something different." "Different how?" Vader said. "Force healing feels like the Force being directed. This felt like the Force being absent while the recovery happened anyway." She paused again. "My lord, I've trained my entire life to read the Force's presence in everything. In that facility, for approximately 90 seconds, I couldn't read anything. Not the target, not myself, not the room." Her voice was controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. It was the most disorienting experience of my operational career. Vader was quiet for a long moment. He said he would come to me, Vader said. On his timeline, his words. And you believe him? She considered the question with the honesty that his inquisitors had learned to use in his presence, because the alternative to honesty in his presence was detectable, and the detection had consequences. Yes, she said. I believe he intends to meet with you. I don't believe the meeting will go the way you're accustomed to meetings going. Vader dismissed her, stood alone in his chamber, and reached into the Force again. The specific searching reach he'd been using for 11 days since the intelligence file, looking for the shaped absence that the Force showed him where the thing should have been. He found it. Not in Florum. The absence had moved, which was itself information, but present, somewhere in the Outer Rim's criminal geography, the negative space of something operating in the galaxy that the Force could outline and not illuminate. He'd been reaching for it repeatedly over 11 days, and each time the outline had been larger, the shaped absence had grown. The territory it occupied in the Force's awareness had expanded. Whatever it was getting stronger. He contacted Palpatine's private channel. Palpatine received the report in his private meditation chamber, which was where he received information he needed to process without the performance of reception that his public roles required. He listened to Vader's summary with the stillness he used for things that required his complete attention. When Vader finished, Palpatine was quiet for 11 seconds. Vader had learned to count the silences. Force perception returned null, Palpatine said. Categorical null. Yes, my master. Not suppressed, not shielded, absent. The Inquisitor's assessment. Another silence. 6 seconds. Lord Vader, in my years of study of the Force and its relationship to all living things, I have encountered Force null individuals. I have encountered Force suppression technologies. I have encountered Isalamiri and similar species whose presence created Force voids. He paused. I have never encountered something that the Force could not perceive at all and that could still affect the physical world. The Inquisitor's wound confirms physical reality, Vader said. The entity is physically present and physically capable, and yet absent in the Force. Palpatine's voice had taken on the quality it had when he was thinking aloud rather than communicating. The processing voice, the one that meant the information was being integrated into frameworks that weren't yet complete. This is not a rival Sith, Lord Vader. This is not a dark side user of unusual power. This is something that operates outside the Force entirely. A pause, which means it operates outside every prediction, every precognition, every calculation I have made about the galaxy's future. It is reorganizing the Underworld, Vader said. The criminal infrastructure that the Empire relies on for certain operations. I'm aware of what the Underworld provides us, Palpatine said, with the flat certainty of someone who had built half of what they were discussing. What concerns me is not the criminal reorganization. What concerns me is the implication of something that the Force cannot see operating with sufficient power to reorganize galactic criminal infrastructure in 31 days. He paused. Lord Vader, everything I have built has been built within the Force's framework. The rule of two, the grand plan, the Empire itself. All of it exists in relationship to the Force's currents. A thing that exists outside those currents is not subject to the plan. It could be contained, Vader said. Physically, if the Force cannot perceive it. Conventional military force. The Inquisitor sustained significant injury from lightsaber contact, and the entity recovered anomalously and delivered a calm tactical assessment and told her to convey that he would meet with you on his timeline, Palpatine said. Does that sound like something that conventional military force will contain efficiently? Vader said nothing. No, Palpatine said. This requires understanding before action, which requires information, which requires someone capable of obtaining information from something that the Force cannot read. He paused. Tell me what you know about the entity's apparent motivations. Criminal consolidation, Vader said. The Underworld reorganized around a center that conventional intelligence cannot locate. Fear-based rather than force-based control. The entity appears to be building infrastructure rather than accumulating power for its own sake. Building toward what? Unknown. Palpatine was quiet for 8 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Not the processing voice, something older. The voice he used when he was looking at something from the perspective of decades rather than months. "Lord Vader," he said, "in 80 years of navigating galactic power structures, I have identified exactly one reliable constant. Everything in this galaxy, every empire, every rebellion, every crime syndicate, every religious order, everything relates to the Force in some way. Even those who cannot use it exist in relationship to those who can. The Force is the organizing principle of galactic civilization." He paused. "What I am describing to you is something that does not share that relationship. Something that exists outside the organizing principle entirely." Another pause. "I want you to understand what that means." "An unknown variable," Vader said. "An extinction event," Palpatine said quietly. "Not because it will necessarily destroy us, but because a thing that exists outside the Force's framework and operates with sufficient power to affect galactic systems undermines the fundamental assumption on which all Sith philosophy is built. If the Force does not govern everything, then the rule of two is not the path to ultimate power. It is simply one path among others." His voice was absolutely level. "I have built my entire life on the premise that there is no other path." The silence that followed lasted 14 seconds. "Find out what it wants," Palpatine said finally. "Not through the Inquisitors, not through intelligence, through whatever channel it prefers." He paused. "It told the Inquisitor it would come to you. Let it come. Meet with it. Listen." A pause with the specific weight of a man choosing his next words, with the care of someone who understood that the wrong words in the wrong moment could reveal more than he intended. "And Lord Vader, do not attempt to destroy it in that meeting. You believe it cannot be destroyed. I believe we do not yet know what destroying it would cost," Palpatine said, "and I have not survived 80 years by paying costs I haven't calculated." He closed the channel. Vader stood alone in his chamber, reached into the Force, found the shaped absence in the Outer Rim's criminal geography, and held it in his awareness. The outline of something the Force could see around but not into. He sent a message through Imperial Intelligence's most secure channel to the relay address the probe team had identified in their initial contact report. The message said, "Lord Vader accepts your terms. Name the location." The reply came back in 4 minutes. "Nar Shaddaa, level 1313, 3 days." And in the Underworld's encrypted communications networks, moving faster than the Imperial message had traveled in either direction, a different piece of information was spreading through every criminal organization that the Shadow Cartel had touched in 31 days. Not a transmission, not a formal announcement. The information that traveled without medium, the specific, unstoppable communication of fear becoming mythology. The living Void King had summoned Darth Vader, and Vader was coming. Vader arrived alone. That was the first thing Jackie noted. Not the escort that had positioned itself in the upper levels of the vertical city, not the Star Destroyer holding position in Nar Shaddaa's orbit with the specific patience of a vessel that had been told to wait and knew how to wait indefinitely. Those were present and noted and filed. What mattered was that Vader himself walked into level 1313 without the Inquisitors, without the Imperial Guard, without the infrastructure of authority that people in his position used to conduct meetings that mattered. He understood the meeting. That was worth something. Level 1313 had changed in 34 days, not physically. The infrastructure was the same decommissioned industrial architecture that Nar Shaddaa's lower levels accumulated over centuries of layered construction. But the space had acquired something that spaces acquired when sufficient attention had been focused through them for sufficient time. A quality, the specific atmospheric weight of a place where significant things had happened and would happen again. Jackie had felt it in certain rooms in New York, the back offices of crime families that had been operating out of the same locations for generations, the accumulated gravity of decisions and their consequences soaking into the walls. Level 1313 had that now. 3 weeks of shadow cartel operations run through this space. 3 weeks of the darkness present and active and building the infrastructure that fear built when it was organized rather than chaotic. The criminal networks that moved through Nar Shaddaa could feel it without being able to identify it. They moved differently through the lower levels now, with the specific wariness of people navigating territory that belonged to something they hadn't seen but had definitely felt. Vader walked through it and felt it differently. Jackie watched him on the approach, not through cameras, through the darkness, which perceived the Force user's arrival as a pressure change in the medium it occupied. The Force and the darkness weren't the same thing, but they weren't entirely separate either. The way light and shadow weren't the same thing, but existed in relationship. Where Vader moved, the Force moved with him. The dark, disciplined current of someone who had been one of the most powerful Force users alive for decades, and carried that power the way heavy objects carried their gravity, as a constant condition rather than an active expression. The darkness didn't like it. Not fear. Jackie had learned to distinguish the darkness's responses well enough to make that distinction reliably. Not threat response. More like the specific discomfort of two systems that operated on incompatible physics being in proximity. Oil and water didn't fear each other. They just didn't mix. Vader stopped in the center of the space. Jackie let him stand there for 30 seconds, which was exactly long enough to communicate that the meeting was on Jackie's terms without being long enough to constitute deliberate disrespect. The distinction mattered. He'd learned that in New York, and it translated. Then he walked out of the darkness, not dramatically. He'd tried dramatic once in the early days with the darkness, and the darkness had a tendency to overdo dramatic in ways that crossed lines he wanted to control. He walked out the way he'd walked into every difficult room in his professional life. Steady, present, projecting the specific quality of someone who had already processed every relevant variable and arrived at a position they intended to hold. Vader was larger than he'd looked in intelligence files, not in the way that physically large people were large, in the way that presence was large. The specific spatial authority of someone whose existence displaced the environment around them rather than occupying it. The armor, the respirator's rhythm, the absolute stillness of someone who had replaced biological fidget with something more controlled, all of it combined into something that was less a person and more a condition of the local environment. Jackie stopped 6 meters away. They looked at each other. The darkness whispered something at the edge of his awareness that he didn't fully catch. An impression about the man inside the armor. Something old and layered and relevant that the darkness recognized from the Force currents around Vader without being able to fully articulate. He filed it as information he didn't have complete access to yet. Jackie Estacado, Vader said. The respirator gave his voice the quality of something speaking from inside a system rather than from inside a body. You've been difficult to find. I haven't been hiding, Jackie said. I've been operating. There's a difference. My intelligence division would dispute that distinction. Your intelligence division is looking through Force-shaped filters, Jackie said. Everything it's designed to find has some relationship to the Force. I don't. He held Vader's gaze, or held the position where Vader's gaze was behind the lenses, in the specific quality of a person looking at a person versus a person looking at a thing. That's not evasion, that's just physics. Vader was quiet for a moment. The respirator cycled. My master believes you represent an extinction-level threat to galactic stability. Your master's stability is built on a philosophy that assumes the Force governs everything, Jackie said. I'm the evidence that the assumption has an edge case. He paused. That's not a threat. That's a data point. Palpatine does not distinguish between data points that undermine his philosophy and threats to his person. I know, Jackie said, which is why I wanted to talk to you before him. Vader was still. Why? Not a question, a prompt. The specific monosyllable of someone whose conversational style had been compressed by decades of operating in environments where efficiency was more valuable than nuance. Jackie looked at him for a moment. At the armor and the respirator and the force presence that the darkness was registering as significant without being able to fully read. At the person the intelligence files described. Anakin Skywalker once, before the name was buried under everything that had happened since. Because you're a pragmatist, Jackie said. Your master is a philosopher. Philosophers protect their frameworks. Pragmatists solve problems. He held Vader's gaze. The Shadow Cartel is a solved problem if you want it to be. Criminal infrastructure that operates completely outside the Force's visibility, which means it operates completely outside Rebel Intelligence's ability to predict it, which means it's the most secure logistics network the Empire has never had. The respirator cycled again. You're proposing an arrangement. I'm describing a reality that already exists, Jackie said. The Shadow Cartel runs through 37 systems. Every major crime syndicate in the Mid-Rim is either operating under its framework or negotiating to. The spice trade, the weapons distribution, the information networks, all of it reorganized around a center that neither the Rebellion nor the Force can see. He paused. The Empire has been using criminal infrastructure through intermediaries for decades. The intermediaries are compromised. Rebel Intelligence has cut points in every major syndicate. I just removed most of them. He held Vader's gaze. I'm not asking for Imperial authority. I'm not asking to be recognized as a legitimate power. I'm describing an arrangement that already functions and asking whether you want to formalize what's already happening. In exchange for what? Vader said. Operational freedom, Jackie said. The Empire doesn't move against the Shadow Cartel. The Shadow Cartel provides the Empire with logistics access and intelligence on Rebel supply chain movements through Underworld networks. He paused. And Palpatine doesn't send assets after me. That last condition, Vader said, is not one I can guarantee. I know, Jackie said, which is why I'm asking you to deliver the first two conditions and let the third one develop on its own. Vader was quiet for 15 seconds. The respirator cycled 3 times. The force around him moved in a way that the darkness registered without understanding. The currents of a powerful mind processing something that didn't fit its usual frameworks. You're afraid of my master, Vader said. Jackie looked at him. Yes, he said, because lying to Darth Vader about something he could probably sense the edges of even through the Force void was tactically stupid. Not in the way I'm afraid of most things. The way I'm afraid of something that's been doing what it does for a very long time and is very good at it. He paused. I've met people like Palpatine before. Different scale. Same fundamental approach. Build the system so thoroughly that there's no position outside it from which to challenge it. He held Vader's gaze. I'm outside it. That makes me more dangerous to him than the Rebellion could ever be. Not because I have more power, but because I'm a category error in his framework. And you think I can protect you from that? I think you're the only person in this galaxy whose presence gives Palpatine a reason to keep me functional rather than eliminate the category error. He paused. You're his most effective instrument. If you tell him the Shadow Cartel is operationally valuable, he keeps it. If you tell him it's an unmanageable variable, he commits everything he has to removing it. He held Vader's gaze. And I'd like to not find out what everything he has looks like when it's focused on one target. The respirator cycled. You're asking me to advocate for your existence. I'm asking you to make an accurate operational assessment and communicate it accurately, Jackie said. If the assessment is that the Shadow Cartel is more valuable functional than eliminated, that's not advocacy. That's military analysis. Vader looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, Show me. They spent 4 hours in Level 1313. Jackie showed him the Shadow Cartel's operational architecture. Not the complete picture, not the locations of the avatars or the full scope of the darkness's reach through the Underworld's geography, but enough. The supply chain maps, the intelligence network. The cut points that had been removed from rebel access and the new routing that moved goods through channels the rebellion's infrastructure couldn't monitor. The 37 systems, the 11 crime syndicates operating under the framework, the specific vulnerabilities in rebel logistics that the Shadow Cartel had identified through Underworld Intelligence in the past 2 weeks. Vader asked precise questions. Jackie answered them precisely. The darkness remained present but quiet, registering Vader as significant without treating him as a threat. The specific equilibrium of 2 systems that had decided to temporarily operate in proximity without resolving their fundamental incompatibility. At the end of the 4 hours, Vader stood and said, "I will present this to my master." "I know you can't promise an outcome," Jackie said. "No." Vader paused. "But I will present it accurately." He looked at Jackie with the lenses that concealed everything and communicated through position alone. "You understand that my master will want to meet you himself?" "Yes," Jackie said. "And you understand what that meeting will actually be?" Jackie held his gaze. "An attempt to bring me into his framework, to find whatever the Force Void equivalent of Sith alchemy is and use it to either control the darkness or understand it well enough to counter it." He paused. "Yes, I understand what it will be. And you'll go anyway. I'll go when I've made certain the meeting happens on terrain that makes that attempt difficult," Jackie said, "which requires time and positioning." He looked at Vader. "Which is why the operational arrangement needs to hold for at least 60 days before that meeting happens." Vader was quiet for a moment. "You're buying time to become too established to eliminate cleanly. I'm building a position from which a meeting with Palpatine is a negotiation rather than an interrogation," Jackie said. "There's a difference. That distinction," Vader said, "is one my master also will not make." "I know," Jackie said. "That's why I'm making it before he gets the chance to define the terms." Vader left the way he'd arrived, alone, efficiently, with the focused movement of someone who had significant information to deliver and understood that the delivery mattered more than the exit. Jackie watched him go through the darkness's awareness until the Force presence moved out of range and the ambient pressure normalized. Then he sat down and held his arm where the Inquisitor's blade had been and thought about the 60 days he'd bought and what he needed to do with them. The Underworld heard about the meeting before the day ended. Not the content. The content was between 2 people in a room, and Jackie hadn't transmitted it, and Vader didn't discuss operational meetings through channels that leaked. What the Underworld heard was the fact of it. Darth Vader had descended to level 1313 alone and spent 4 hours in conversation with the living Void King and departed without violence. That information traveled through every criminal network in the Mid-Rim within 18 hours. The conclusions it produced were varied and collectively significant. The Hutt kajidics, who had spent 34 days trying to understand the Shadow Cartel through the framework of conventional criminal power, revised their framework. If Vader came to the meeting and left without resolving it through violence, the living Void King was not something that Vader's violence could resolve, which meant it was not something that the Hutt's considerably more limited violence could resolve, which meant the negotiation that the Hutts had been delaying through intermediary channels needed to happen directly and on less favorable terms than they'd been hoping for. 3 kajidic representatives arrived at level 1313 within 48 hours of the Vader meeting. Not together, separately, which was the Hutt way of conducting business that might go badly, ensuring that no single meeting produced catastrophic loss. The darkness received them one at a time. The negotiations were brief. The outcomes were consistent. The Hutts joined the framework, not as partners, as participants, the distinction being one that the darkness had very specific feelings about, and Jackie had learned to implement precisely. Partners implied mutual authority. Participants implied recognized function within a structure someone else defined. The Hutts had been defining structures for 4,000 years. They sat inside someone else's for the first time since the Republic's founding with the specific discomfort of something very old being asked to be smaller than it was accustomed to being. Black Sun's remaining independent princes made their decisions within the same 48 hours. not in response to the Hutt movement, but in response to the same information that had moved the Hutts. The Vader meeting had clarified something that 34 days of Shadow Cartel expansion had implied, without confirming. The living Void King was not a criminal phenomenon. It was something the Empire itself was choosing to negotiate with rather than eliminate. That was a different category entirely. Seni handled the Black Sun integration with the specific efficiency of someone who had been positioned correctly at the beginning and was now collecting on the positioning. He'd wanted to survive 6 months. Jackie assessed his chances as significantly better than that now, and told him so, which produced the first expression Jackie had seen on Seni that was entirely genuine and entirely unguarded. The Crimson Dawn remnants were the last to come. They came not as an organization. Crimson Dawn's remnants didn't have enough coherence left to come as an organization, but as individuals, the surviving lieutenants of Maul's operation arriving over a period of 2 weeks in ones and twos, each of them carrying the specific combination of ambition and grief that came from having served something significant that was now gone. They wanted the significance back. The darkness offered them something different. Not significance, of function. A place in a structure that was building rather than mourning. The difference between the past and the forward direction. Most of them took it. On the 58th day, Palpatine summoned Jackie to Coruscant. Not through Imperial Intelligence, not through Vader's channel. Through a direct communication on a frequency that should have been impossible to route to Level 1313's communications array, which told Jackie that Palpatine had resources he hadn't deployed yet, and wanted Jackie to know that before they met. The message was brief. I know what you are. Come and show me that I'm wrong. Jackie read it twice. The darkness stirred. The complex, layered stirring of something that recognized a challenge at a level deeper than the words carrying it. He'd spent 58 days building the position. 37 systems, 11 syndicates, the Hutt framework, Black Sun integration, Crimson Dawn remnants repurposed. The Shadow Cartel was too embedded in the galaxy's criminal infrastructure to eliminate cleanly. Removing it now would collapse supply chains that the Empire relied on, destabilize underworld networks that Imperial Intelligence used for operations it didn't want attributed to the Empire, and produce a power vacuum that the rebellion would fill faster than any replacement structure could be built. He was, in the specific language that mattered to people like Palpatine, too expensive to remove. That wasn't safety. Safety wasn't a category the darkness offered or that his life had ever provided. But it was leverage, and leverage was the currency that actually ran the galaxy underneath whatever the Force said about power and destiny. He sent a reply, 3 days, your location. My terms for the meeting. The response came in 40 seconds, which was Palpatine communicating that 40 seconds was how long it took him to decide whether to accept terms from something that shouldn't be in a position to set them. Accepted. Jackie looked at the message, at the 58 days of work it represented, and the meeting it was leading toward, and the man on the other side of it who had built an empire on the premise that the Force governed everything and had just agreed to meet on terms set by something the Force couldn't see. The darkness whispered something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite anticipation, and was entirely its own category of response to a situation it had been waiting longer than Jackie's lifetime to encounter. He looked at Nar Shaddaa through the Level 1313 viewport, the smuggler's moon, layered and criminal and running on fear and profit. He'd arrived here 34 days after entering the galaxy with nothing but the darkness and what it offered and what it cost. He was leaving it with 11 syndicates and 37 systems and a meeting with the Emperor of the Galaxy in 3 days. Maury would say we need more time, he said to the darkness, which didn't know who Maury was, had no context for the reference, and didn't need any because the darkness's response to whether they needed more time was the same as its response to most things Jackie said. Present, constant, patient, here. He wasn't talking to the darkness. He was talking to the habit of having someone to talk to before the hard meetings. He'd get used to not having it. He always did. 3 days, he thought. 3 days to walk into a room with the most powerful Sith Lord in the galaxy, who had spent 80 years building a framework that assumed the Force governed everything, and demonstrate that the assumption had an edge case. Not destroy him, not fight him. Demonstrate. The specific precision of showing someone something true in a room where the truth was going to be very unwelcome. The galaxy's underworld was organized around a center it called the Living Void King, and couldn't locate and couldn't counter and had stopped trying to counter and had started building mythology around instead, which was what civilizations did with things they couldn't categorize. They made them sacred. The Emperor was going to try to make him a category. Jackie was going to spend the meeting resisting categorization. Whichever of them held that position longer was going to define what came after. He picked up the communication device and began composing the terms for the meeting's parameters. Location, duration, attendees. The specific conditions under which the darkness would remain controlled rather than reactive. The work of turning a confrontation into a negotiation before it happened, which was the only kind of preparation that actually mattered for meetings like the one coming. The darkness settled around him like a second skin that had always been a second skin and was, at this particular moment, very awake. Outside, above the vertical city, above Nar Shaddaa's layered chaos, the Star Destroyer that had been holding position for 58 days adjusted its bearing slightly, not departing, repositioning. Someone aboard it had received a communication, and the communication had changed something about its operational parameters. In every criminal network that the Shadow Cartel touched across 37 systems, the information was already moving without being transmitted. The specific communication of mythology responding to a significant event, the living thing that rumor became when it was describing something that had no conventional language. The Living Void King was going to Coruscant to meet the Emperor. And the galaxy's underworld, which had spent 58 days learning that the darkness was something it couldn't fight and couldn't predict and couldn't categorize, held the specific collective breath of something waiting to find out whether the thing it had made sacred was going to come back, or whether Coruscant was where the void finally found its limit.